received compensation. Stuart McLean's still waiting for money.
Still not listened to today, still fighting to try and get the compensation I'm deserved. They put obstacles in my way at every turn. They're asking questions of doctors which the doctor can't answer. At the moment, it just seems a whole mess.
The mother of a girl who was stabbed 33 times during the Southport stabbings has told a public inquiry our girls deserve an apology. Families of those who survived the attack by Axel Barnet have been giving evidence at Liverpool Town Hall. Resident doctors in England are due to go on strike for 5 days at the end of the month in their row over pay. Members of the British Medical Association want a 29% increase, which the government says it can't afford. England have thrashed the Netherlands 4-0 in their second match at the Women's Euros. Lauren James scored twice for the Lionesses. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 12 points, 88.67. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.16. LBC weather dry and settled for most tonight. Some light rain in the far northwest, a low of 10 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello and welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question with me, Iain Dale. It's 8:01. On our panel tonight, to my left, Anna Firth, former Conservative MP. To her left, and everybody's left, Dan Tomlinson, Labour MP for Chipping Barnet. To my right, Jacqueline McKenzie, Head of Immigration and Asylum Law at Leigh Solicitors. She served on Labour's Race Equality Task Force. And next to her, my esteemed colleague, Henry Riley. They are here to answer your calls. We'd love your calls on 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number, text 84850. Say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and it'll appear miraculously on the screen in front of me. And of course, you can watch our proceedings on Global Player or the LBC app.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first question. It's a text question from Sophie in Cirencester. Is swapping people who came here on small boats for other asylum seekers anything other than a cheap gimmick? Now, a one-in, one-out agreement to tackle small boats crossing the English Channel is set to be announced by Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron tomorrow during the French President's state visit to the UK. It would see those people who've come to the UK on a small boat sent back to France in exchange for asylum seekers who have family connections already in the UK. Jacqueline, let's start with you. What do you think of this idea?
Well, we don't know the full details yet, but it does sound complex, and I think the government themselves have said it's extremely complex, because what we know, and as a practitioner in this space who deals with a number of people who have come over via small boats, but some come in other ways, we often find that nearly everybody has a family connection to the UK. So I don't know how you...
Great Aunt Ethel 3 times removed.
Well, could be Great Aunt Ethel or Uncle Ali or whoever. But we know that people choose the UK for a variety of reasons, and one of those is actually family connections, because obviously we've had asylum seekers and refugees here for decades. The ties through community spaces, community organisations, faith organisations and so forth. So it is one of the reasons why the UK is seen as an attractive destination, as opposed to the narrative about benefits and housing and all that sort of thing. But I don't know. I mean, does the government themselves know what percentage of people crossing the Channel have absolutely no relatives here, or is there going to be a degree of a relationship? Is it you have to be just one person removed? I mean,
what are the legal implications here? I mean, could somebody ring you up if this scheme is implemented? Could they ring you up and say, "Look, I do have a relative in Newcastle. I just picked Newcastle as an example, but they're saying that I can't be part of this scheme for whatever reason. Will you take up my case?"
Well, if the scheme is formalised with primary legislation or incorporated into the rules in some way that says that the criteria, I mean, outside of the Refugee Convention and other things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, if the scheme is that you have to have a close family member here and somebody has one, then on what grounds are you going to deny them access to certainly making a claim? And if you deny them access, they're likely to have perhaps the right to judicially review that decision or some other legal mechanism. So it's very complex. I actually think it's unworkable, really.
Well, a lot of people listening are going to think, well, why should someone just be allowed into this country just because they have one maybe distant family relative here? How fair is that to other people who might have a really good asylum claim, but don't have any family living here?
I agree with that, absolutely. I would support them. That's not the measure. We have the Refugee Convention, and you have to prove that you're fleeing persecution. And as we know, large numbers of people coming do prove, either at the first instance or through the appellate courts, that they are fleeing persecution. Of course, we know that some people don't prove that and stay. And there are problems in the system. No one's denying that. But great numbers do make that claim.
Anna.
Yeah. Well, I think this is absolutely a gimmick, but I don't think it's going to be a cheap gimmick. I think this is going to set up a new legal route. I think this harbour in Calais will very soon be completely inundated. But what it's absolutely not going to do is stop the small boat crossings, because the people who go on those small boats are clearly very, very risk tolerant. It's a risk that they take. And with this deal, and what we're seeing on Twitter this evening is a suggestion that this is actually going to be a 17 in and 1 out deal. So we're going to get more people coming. Yeah, that's what's being... Apparently Macron has said he'll take 50 a week, which would work out to around 17 in, 1 out. It would mean you'd have a 6% chance of being sent back if you cross. So there'll be no deterrent factor whatsoever. The boats will keep coming, the numbers will keep increasing, plus there'll be this new route which we will just have opened up. So I think this is completely the wrong approach from this government. It's cack-handed. This is from a Prime Minister who said his number one aim was going to be to smash the gangs, and in fact all he's done is smashed records. We've now got record numbers coming, and with a gimmick like this, they will keep coming.
Dan Tomlinson, I mean, from what Anna said there, if that's right, 17 in, 1 out, I mean, that's the kind of negotiating skills that they used over the Chagos Islands, isn't it?
Well, we don't know what's going to be announced tomorrow, and I don't like starting by criticising Tories, but if you forgive me, £700 million was spent on the Miranda scheme and 4 volunteers were sent overseas. So it's a bit rich to say that something that hasn't even been announced yet is a gimmick. On the issue of migration, this is a really big and really important issue, and the big problem that I hear from voters in my constituency, which is here in North London, and I know from colleagues across the country, particularly in those seats that we won back from the Tories in the Red Wall, the thing that people want to see is control. What they hate is the scenes on the French coast of people jumping in the boats, seeing the French not doing enough to stop them, people coming here, and the fact that people are coming on the boats, we don't know whether or not those people have got a legitimate claim or they have a legitimate claim. It basically depends on whether you've got the money or the wherewithal to get in touch with a smuggler and find your way across the channel. That's not fair to anyone. It's not fair to British people who want to see our borders secured. So I'm really clear, the Labour Party is really clear, we've got to tackle this issue. And there's a big question to ask here. The Tory approach was basically rip up our deals with our international partners.
No, it wasn't.
Sort of threaten repeatedly to leave our international institutions that help us get deals with other countries. It was a bit less under Rishi Sunak, but under other Conservative prime ministers, it was basically give up on a relationship with the EU. We're taking a different approach, which is trying to work incredibly closely with our allies in Europe to try and get deals, to work with the French. I think that it's the case that 12,000 small boat crossings have been stopped by our work with the French. And we saw just last week that they did take that intervention in the water, which I think is a really important step. It's only one aspect. There's a lot that we could talk about that we need to do to stop the boats, but we have to get control. And if we can get deals with the French, and that is a move towards having more control over who comes and who doesn't come. And
that's exactly what Priti Patel and Suella Braverman were saying when they were Home Secretary. But the problem, I think...
It probably wasn't exactly what they said, exactly what I just said.
Well, no, I mean, they came to deals with the French. It involved bugging the French some money in the hope that they would take more action to stop the boats coming over. It didn't work, clearly. But I think the problem that you've got is that people think, well, what you said is eminently reasonable. It's what Labour said during the general election campaign. And yet we're a year on now from the election, and the number of people coming across the channel has gone up by 48% this year compared to last year. Now, it's all very well to say we've got to smash the gangs. How many gangs have been smashed in the last year? Not very many, I don't think. And when you have those kind of figures, people look at the figures and they say, well, nothing has changed.
People should look at the figures and they should hold us to account on those figures. We need to get the number of small boat crossings down. We need to have a migration system that isn't determined by who is able to pay money to smugglers and make their way across the channel. And one of the reasons why we need to do that, may I say, is because there are children dying in the channel on these crossings. This is not a humane way to have our border and our asylum system work. So there's many reasons about domestic control, which are really important, but it's also about the vulnerable people who are being exploited by the criminal gangs. But I hear what you're saying, Ian, and I hear what the public say. I hear it when I go out on the doorstep in my constituency in North London every week. We've got to make progress on this issue, and the country, at the time of the next general election, should hold us to account on that and a whole range of other issues.
Because if you don't, it's another reason why people are saying, well, Nigel Farage is going to be Prime Minister.
Well, and he will pretend, he'll stand up in the Commons each week and pretend he's got all the answers, suggesting that we should rip up all of our agreements with all of our international partners and that somehow that will enable him to get a deal to return people to certain places.
But the point is that the Conservatives failed. If it doesn't go right, you will have failed. And so most reasonable-minded voters will think, well, give Nigel Farage a chance. I mean, he's talking the right language. I mean, he may fail, but at least give him a chance. That is where we're heading on all sorts of different issues. And I'm not sure that a lot of people in your party recognise what is lying ahead if you don't deliver on not just this promise, but some of the others too.
I can't talk for everyone in my party, but I can talk for myself here, Ian, and I recognise that. Actually, my constituency, I think if it's won by someone else next time, it will be won by the Conservative Party. It's a seat that's traditionally voted Conservative. It was a really safe seat. Sidney Chapman and Reginald Maudlin, who was a Tory Chancellor, held it in the past.
First seat I ever applied for.
Yeah, there we go. So you know it very well. But the threat from reform is really real, and that's why we've got to make progress on this and on other issues too.
Henry Riley.
Well, I think if it walks like a gimmick, if it quacks like a gimmick, it probably is a gimmick. I mean, the whole situation with small boats crossings is out of control. I mean, the fact that it's gone up by 55% in the first 6 months of this year, you can't have a Prime Minister talking endlessly about smashing the gangs and then us to see no progress in smashing the gangs. I remember looking at the sort of news feed on, I think it was Friday evening, to see a video of a dinghy being slashed. I mean, slashing a dinghy is not the same as smashing the gangs. We know that these boats...
No, but it's part of it. I mean, the French have refused to do that.
I know, but it's one dinghy. I mean, slashing a dinghy, I just don't think is going to help.
Great coincidence that it's 4 days before Emmanuel Macron comes to this country, I suppose.
And the BBC happened to be there at the right time, quite. And look, I think if you think of... we know that a lot of these boats are made in Turkey. The engines are made in Germany. If you really want to go after smashing the gangs, you have to get into the factories there and use diplomacy there. So, and I take the point, Dan, that I know the government is doing an awful lot to try and tackle it, but I was talking to someone very senior in the police today in counter-terrorism who made the point, which I couldn't believe, of the 20,000 people that have crossed the Channel in the first 6 months of this year, not one has been spoken to by a police official or by some sort of Home Office official. Now, you'd think if there were 20,000 people crossing the Channel, it might be an idea to ask someone who's made that perilous crossing about the gang that has helped them make the crossing, if you are serious about smashing the gang. So I don't think it's an issue that is going to be resolved anytime soon. The parameters of the debate are switching. Lord Glasman, I was listening to on LBC today, saying to put Royal Navy ships in the Channel to sort of work out where these small boats are coming. I sort of slightly despair about
that's such an easy thing to say, isn't it? Because, I mean, what are they supposed to do when they're there? Sort of shoot at them to send them back, or what?
Exactly. I mean, he made the point that it was to identify them, but I mean, this is coming from a Labour peer, let's be clear, and someone
the Navy, all you need is a few drones.
Well,
exactly.
Yeah.
But can I say something? I mean, one of the things is, and I always say this, and people probably get fed up of hearing me saying this, there are over 130 million people displaced around the world, all looking for a safe haven. The vast majority of these people end up in very poor countries. 1 million Rohingyas in Bangladesh. Colombia, which is a lesser developed country, has taken in 2 million people from Venezuela. We had 14,000, actually, people cross the Channel in the first 6 months of this country, not 20,000.
Well, 20,000 is a figure that's always quoted.
But 14,000 is always a figure that the Home Office said this week. So
why does the 20,000
and that's
figure
one
come
of the
from?
issues, isn't it? Where are these figures coming from?
think it's
Because
21,000.
even that 1 in 17 figure is predicated on something that Home Office said last year, 37,000 crossed in the year 2024. So that's the other thing. We look at media headlines and we look at the Home Office and we look at the Oxford Migration Observatory. What are the facts? Do we even know what the facts are? But let's say it is 20,000.
I think that's what the Home Office are saying,
but
21,000.
Let's say it's 21,000. I just said there's 130 million people. There are Palestinians crossing the channel. There are Afghans. There are Iraqis, Iranians, Syrians and Eritreans. Why do we not have schemes for them? And I know safe schemes and safe routes is becoming a cliche in this discussion, but it's all well and good for all the parties to say we're going to tackle the smugglers. You can't, because they're not known. They're all over the world.
I don't believe this. I think the smugglers are absolutely
it's a very sophisticated, I mean, from what we understand and the stories we hear from our clients, it's a really sophisticated global problem that is eclipsing the drug trade.
One of the things nobody has got to grips with is why aren't the French stopping these boats leaving? We've all seen the videos of the gendarmerie. Just let me finish.
Of course. Sorry, forgive me.
We've all seen the videos of the gendarmerie actually standing there on the beaches and the people in very shallow water. Now, 90% of the boats leaving Belgium, because they have a problem as well, do not leave the shores. They are successful in stopping 90% of embarkations. So it is possible to do it. The French should be doing it, and we've paid them 500,000 to do it.
500 million, not 500,000.
500 million, of course.
I mean, what's the incentive for the French to do it? Because as far as they're concerned, I mean, they won't ever say this publicly, but the more people that leave their shores and come to us, that's a problem off the French hands, isn't it?
Well, it is, but it is causing a real problem now for the French. I mean, one of the deputy mayors has given an interview today saying that all along his shore and inlands, in the dunes, along the rivers, you know, that the local people can't now go out and they don't feel safe going out because there are so many migrants hiding, there are so many gangs. So I can understand, well, I would say it's their duty as well. But where I would take issue with Dan, this government has come up with all sorts of ideas. It was on the right track a few months ago when it talked about offshore processing. Remember the announcement they were going to have an offshore processing hub, copying the Tories' idea. This time it was going to be in Albania. But then the Albanian Prime Minister, very embarrassingly, said, no, we're not actually doing that at all. But they were on the right lines then. And to say that you said, Iain, that the Tories didn't solve it, and you're absolutely right. But the one thing that was showing signs of working was the Rwanda deterrent.
There was no deterrent there.
There were people. There were
volunteers, £700 million.
That is such.
Two Home Secretaries.
That is such a cheap point because it was a deterrent.
How was it a deterrent? If you thought that there was like a 1 in 100 chance of you being sent to Rwanda, how would that be a deterrent? You'd still take the risk.
The evidence was, Iain, that people in Calais were saying that they were hoping Labour were going to get in because they knew that Labour would cancel Rwanda, so they were waiting to see if that happened. And we had the problem with Ireland as well, when Ireland actually said to Rishi Sunak, you know, we're really fed up with everybody coming here because of your Rwanda plan. It absolutely was.
Okay, Dan, final word to you.
I despair sometimes. If the Tory policy is 700 million sent for people voluntarily to another country, then that's okay. That can be their policy. Just one thing we have been doing this year is passing the border security bill through Parliament, which Tories and Reform voted against. That's one of the central planks of the approach of the Prime Minister and of the government. That gives the Border Security Command and the police working in this area counter-terror powers to go after the gangs, to use extra surveillance and being able to get into people's WhatsApp chats and the like. I think that is a really important measure, and I hope that will help us go after the gangs more. And on the French doing more, of course we all want to see more. We should say, though, that 12,000 crossings, I believe, have been stopped by the French this year.
Yeah, but 30,000 haven't.
I accept that. But I'm just saying the French aren't doing nothing, right? Okay. They are.
Right, it's time we need to move on to other subjects. But first a break. It's 8:19.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
With us for the next 40 minutes are Dan Tomlinson, Labour MP for Chipping Barnet, Anna Firth, former Conservative MP, Jacqueline McKenzie, Head of Immigration and Asylum Law at Leigh, and Henry Riley, LBC reporter and presenter. Or should it be the other way round? Which do you prefer?
I do more reporting, so we'll probably
stick
with that way.
Right, Mike in Catford says, who's to blame for the resident doctors going on strike again? Now, resident doctors in the BMA have announced a 5-day-long walkout at the end of this month. Dan?
So I understand why doctors have made this vote. I understand their concerns. I've got lots of doctors and healthcare professionals in my constituency who've seen their pay eroded over many years. That said, the Health Secretary agreed what I believe is in the region of approaching 30% pay rise over a relatively small number of years, with a 5.5% pay rise this year. I think most people listening will think that's a reasonable increase. The Labour government, has gone a long way to providing extra funds when resources are really tight for those who look after all of us in the NHS. We really value them. That's why they've had a large pay increase, and that's coming in over the coming years. I hope one day we'll be able to do more. And if I may, can I make one bigger picture argument, which is one of the reasons why, when we make comparisons with the pay of healthcare professionals in the UK and Canada and Australia, one of the reasons why doctors are paid much more abroad, and I do know people moving abroad, I hear it in my own constituency, is because Britain is not a rich country anymore. And so countries like Canada and Australia are not just 5 or 10% richer than us, they're 30, 40% richer than us. And so they can afford to pay their doctors and nurses and all of their population 30 or 40% more. And so that is why I'm the growth mission champion. It's my backbench job title. It's one
Is that really?
Yes, there you go.
Who gave you that?
It was Ellie Reeves, the chair of the Labour Party. There we go.
It's a poison chalice, wasn't
Well, no, because we're doing a good job. We've got the fastest growth in the G7 at the moment, and we're going to turn this economy around. But it is why we've got to turn the economy around, because people working in lots of different parts of the public sector and people working in the private sector too are struggling with the cost of living crisis. They're struggling with their living standards, and we need to do more for everybody to improve the economy. And yeah, I just wanted to make that bigger picture argument too, because it fits in when I hear from doctors and healthcare professionals saying they could get paid more overseas. It's because we're struggling as an economy as a whole. We've had 14 years of low or very no growth. If wages have kept going up since the financial crisis at the same rate they had before the financial crisis, on average, every single worker in this country would be £11,000 a year better off.
I do understand why you always say 14 years. I mean, I get the politics.
I actually mentioned since the financial crisis,
yeah,
not
I know.
just 2010. So I think that's
Well,
quite
no, we have to remember the financial crisis started in 2008. So
which is why I said since the financial crisis.
Okay,
credit to me.
Fair enough. Always credit to you, Dan. Won't hear a word said against you. But cutting to the chase, I mean, should they be going on strike in support of this pay claim? Because I don't see that West Streeting is going to give in this time.
I don't think, given the 28-29% pay rise, that there are reasonable grounds for action in this case. As I say, I understand...
You started off your answer by saying you understood what
I understand the pressure that they're facing, but to be clear, I don't think there are reasonable grounds given the 28%. I hope that they can keep having discussions. I hope that we can improve the public finances. I hope that more money can be available. And of course I understand that there are recruitment and retention problems. I hear it all the time. I hear it from teachers as well. I hear it from other parts of the public sector.
Henry?
I mean, they're not going to get a 29% pay rise. It's obviously performative, and I worry that junior doctors who do an amazing resident doctors, as we should call them, do an amazing job. And I'm all in favour of the name change, by the way, despite my faux pas then. But the issue, as far as I see it, is public sympathy is turning against them. And you look at the figures, I think it was in May, when 48% of the public disagreed with the round of strikes then. And I think it was about sort of 37% agreed. So, and that was back then. I think that the sort of level of support they enjoyed under the Conservative government, where I think people did have the view that perhaps the Conservatives and their sort of traditional relationship with the unions wasn't going to heed results and wasn't going to end the dispute. Well, the fact they can see that under a Labour government now and under Wes Streeting, who's probably seen as being one of the more sort of fixers of the cabinet, someone who likes to get things done, someone who's clearly passionate about getting the waiting list down, the fact that they've managed to peeve him off to the point where you look at his statements today, he's furious, he's incandescent with them, and rightly so. So I worry that public sympathy is going to start to sort of wane away. Having said that, I don't think it's a great look for a government that really blame the sort of Conservatives for the last 14 years, in particular the last few years of that government, for failing to get doctors off the picket lines and in the hospitals, to now see them doing the exact same thing with the exact same demands.
I remember when the last round of strikes happened that they tried to say, and I think Labour tried to say this as well, that it wouldn't affect waiting lists, whereas, I mean, any half-sane person could work out, of course it will. And, of course, now they're saying, oh, well, if this strike goes ahead, it'll mean sort of 200,000 fewer appointments at hospitals. So all the work that Wes Streeting has done to try and get the waiting list down over the last year, that will be for nothing. Jacqueline?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you keep asking really complex things, don't you?
It's not me, it's our listeners.
Great listeners. It's difficult because two personal experiences of this. A friend's daughter has just gone to New Zealand, trained by this country, born and brought up here, all her education here, and we get nothing back.
Maybe that should be banned. Maybe you have to do 5 years in the NHS before you're allowed to.
Well, I must admit, I did kind of wonder about that, but she is earning, as a junior doctor, as they're still called in New Zealand, 3 times what she would have earned in the UK, and her rent is half of anything she would have paid in London. This is the broader point about... And you were Dan was making that point. That's the first thing.
3 times?
3 times.
Wow.
Now,
so over £100,000 a year?
Absolutely.
As a junior doctor?
Absolutely. And I've got a cousin who's an oncologist in California who has fallen in love with a British man, wanted to come, and so she was speaking to me about the immigration of it, and then she found out what she'd earned. He's now going to California.
Right. I was going to say he's been dumped.
So it's a real problem, and it's the cost of living. It's I accept doctors have had 22%, I think it was, and this further 5.4% is much more than anybody else is getting.
That's
and there are
problem,
many people who are low paid in this country, and there is still a crisis in the NHS. Even the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting himself, has alluded to the fact that they are not able to make gains as quickly as they thought, and this will cause more problems. There'll be longer waiting lists and so forth, more disaffection. But what are people to do? I'm a former trade unionist myself, and sometimes it's the only way.
I wouldn't want to come up against you in a negotiation.
It's sometimes the only way is to go on strike, but it is extremely unfortunate.
Okay, Anna Firth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is completely outrageous, and if I can start with a little party political point, because
go on we were I accept it.
Well, we were absolutely pilloried, Dan, by Keir and the other side, saying how easy it was to negotiate with the doctors, how Rishi should just have been able to negotiate, and he should have been able to solve it, and he shouldn't have prolonged the misery by not ending the strikes. And clearly now, Keir and Wes are seeing it's not actually quite as easy as they said in opposition. But I actually think this is completely outrageous, because the resident doctors, and of course I think they do an amazing job, and it's an incredibly important job. And my own brother is a doctor, and I remember how hard he worked as a resident doctor. But the fact is, they've had the largest public sector pay award in recent years, 22.3% for the last 2 years, 5.4% for this year, so 29% odd in total. The police, have seen 4.75%, the fire service 4%. So this is totally unrealistic to expect another 29%, because the very people who've got to pay for this are the teachers, are the firemen, are the people in supermarkets who are earning considerably less. That's the first point. The second point is we never have a proper argument about this because we always just look at their pre-tax pay. We never consider the very, very generous pension rights that doctors have, 23% in pension, nor do we take into account the acceleration. So in year one, a junior doctor will be earning, including the pension, $45,000, but by year 5, that's up to $65,000, and within a few years after that, it's over $100,000 as a consultant. They have complete job security. So I'm sorry, compared with other public sector workers, these pay increases are huge. They cannot be afforded. It would be lovely to be able to pay the junior doctors more. It'd be lovely to pay the firemen more and the police more. But the reality is we can't. And I actually 100% agree with Wes Street.
They're going to have to, though, aren't they? They're going to have to pay it because we saw with the Asylum strikes sort of the back end of last year where Labour had to match it because they wanted to get the show back on the road. If that figure of 200,000 appointments is true, I mean, they've got no option. Wes Streeting, probably the reason he's unleashed that sort of furious statement today is because he knows deep down he's going to have to meet this, or certainly very close to it.
It's an interesting point, Henry, but I was talking to some friends today about this, and they were saying that actually we now have a surfeit of doctors coming out of medical school. So if we actually now have more doctors than we need, then actually supply and demand means that he should be in a stronger position.
So under the last government, we had a really prolonged period of strike action by a whole range of different public sector workers, including doctors and nurses as well. And one of the criticisms that we made in opposition was that the Conservatives weren't getting around the table and negotiating. And the difference here is Wes Streeting today was meeting with the BMA and does acknowledge that there are some challenges around career progression, around working hours and conditions, and we're having those conversations. So I'm not as fatalistic as you, Henry, on the chances of this strike going ahead, because the difference is that we are having close conversations with the BMA.
If I may, I take that point, by the way.
We're trying to find a way forward.
You're right, and when Steve Barclay was the health secretary, it was something he was rightly criticised for. One thing I don't understand, though, is if you're going into a negotiation and junior doctors are clearly furious, why make this big public pronouncement before and say the public are furious at you, I'm furious with you? That's not how you negotiate in public. The Labour Party spent the last 14 years in opposition having a go at the Conservatives for doing these negotiations in public and ministers making strong statements. Why is Wes Streeting showing his hand in public?
Wes Streeting's a straight-talking politician, isn't he?
Well,
so you sort of have to
maybe too straight-talking.
You have to sort of understand that you're going to get that what he says is sort of what he means, and he doesn't hold back. So.
Dom says, can you check that stat about junior doctors in New Zealand, that they earn 3 times as much? It says online that the salary is 70 to 140,000 New Zealand dollars, which is pretty much the same as the UK. Are the pensions the same? Well, I have actually checked that on ChatGPT, and it confirms that those salaries. I mean, I don't know where you got that figure from.
I'm just going to.
But it's not right.
I'm going to ask her father because that's what he told me.
All right.
Because I was furious. I thought, well, we've trained her and we get nothing back, and that's what he told me. So
Dom has worked it out. I've looked at ChatGPT. You can't always trust that, but they're saying that the top salary is 145,000 New Zealand dollars, and that's about £70,000.
Let's check it.
Anyway, while Jacqueline checks it out, we'll bring that hot breaking news to you in a few minutes' time. Let's get the news headlines at 8:33 with Darryl Jackson.
The chair of the Infected Blood Inquiry has warned victims are suffering further harm due to delays in compensation. Just 460 people of the more than 30,000 who were given contaminated blood products have received payouts more than a year since the findings. Sir Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron have agreed a new deterrent is needed to stop small boat crossings in the Channel. They've been holding talks in Downing Street on the second day of the French president's state visit. Novak Djokovic is through to a record 14th Wimbledon semi-final. The 7-time champion came back from a set down to get past Italian Flavio Cobolli on centre court. LBC weather dry and settled for most tonight. Some light rain in the far northwest, a low of 10 degrees.
This is LBC.
Yes.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:36. Dan Tomlinson, Anna Firth, Jacqueline McKenzie and Henry Riley with us. Have you got your answer yet, Jacqueline?
What I have found is that junior doctors can earn up to 145,000. You hear me?
Well, we can hear you.
You can hear me. Sorry. What I have found is that junior doctors in New Zealand can earn up to 145,000 New Zealand dollars, which is £64,000. And that's about twice. So 3 times may have been wrong, but I'm waiting to find out whether she's gone into the private sector.
Yeah, but that's the highest level. At the entry level, I think you get paid more in this country because the base entry level after last year's settlement is now £38,000, depending on what you're doing, and the entry level for, I think, registrars is £58,000. Anyway, let's not fall out over that. Chris is in Richmond. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Ian. Hello, panel. Given that the Labour Party is supposed to all be about education, should we not all be disappointed about their plans to remove education and healthcare plans and reform special needs education?
Now, some Labour backbenchers have expressed concerns at reports of the government cut education, health, care and care plans, or EHCPs, which guarantee that a child with special educational needs gets the right support for them paid for by their local authority. Jacqueline, let's start with you.
The government cutting these?
Yeah.
Well, it's a real problem. I've been a school governor of a difficult school in southeast London, and it's a real problem. And increasingly across society, whether it's because we're more aware and make greater diagnosis, large numbers of children are reporting with special educational needs, and we need more resources. Rather than less. So extremely disturbed to hear this. I regularly come across parents.
Just to say, we're not cutting the funding for special educational needs, just to be really clear. The government put $1 billion extra in at the budget last year. I think all can agree that this is quite different from some of the other issues the government has had recently. This isn't about cutting. This is about a system that I don't think, from all the conversations I've had with parents and teachers in my constituency, isn't working as it is. So this is about how do we use the resource that we've got, that the government has increased, and how do we design a system that's better. So we're not, just to be really clear for listeners, and just so we're all on the same page, the money's not being taken out here. We're actually putting more money in.
Well, are you saying that the need has increased then, and so there won't be sufficient resources? Well, why is it an issue if you're putting more money in? I haven't quite understood then.
So the question, and I would be interested if Chris is still on the line to hear his perspective, if he's got relatives or as a teacher, or and how he thinks the system should be reformed, because it is a really difficult question, because at the moment we've got thousands of parents up and down the country waiting for these educational healthcare plans, ECHPs. I think that the deadline is meant to be 20 weeks, and in some parts of the country it's only single figures percentages of parents and children that are getting those plans done and dusted within that timeline. And the big problem we've got is that it's only once you've got that plan, once you've been through the diagnosis process, which is a lot of parents are having to go private to do it, to speed it up. It's only once you've got that plan that the school is then able to get the resource to provide your child with the additional support that they might need. And so what we need to do is think about how we can reform that system so that we can get the resource more quickly to the teachers, so that they can provide that support, not after 6 months, a year, 18 months of waiting, but once we realise that children need the additional support.
How are you going to address this in the short term? Because we see regularly parents are waiting up to a year for these, and then having to find thousands of pounds to go to an educational psychologist, a private educational psychologist. So what are you going to do now?
This is good. This is the Jacqueline and Iain Dale show. It's very good.
I haven't said a word.
The plan is for the government to publish a white paper later in the year which outlines the options that it's considering on reform. We don't yet know what the government is going to decide.
But why have they announced anything then? If they're just saying, well, we're going to do something, but we're not quite sure what's the point of that?
The government haven't.
Because Chris and lots of people like him, I suspect, fear that there are going to be cuts.
So the one thing that the government has announced in this space is £1 extra billion, a big investment, extra money towards SEND and additional needs for children, and we've put more money into local authorities as well, more broadly, because it's local authorities who distribute these funds and work with the schools to make it happen.
This is exactly what happened under the Conservatives when they said, we are spending so much more on disability benefits, and yet every disabled person that phoned into my programme said, well, we're not seeing any of it, and you wonder where it goes. Chris is still on the line. Before we come to our other panellists, let's get a little bit more perspective from Chris. Chris, what are you mainly concerned about?
Well, I think there's two things. I was spent 6 years as a trustee of a brilliant charity called Skylights, which helps people every single week who are getting, frankly, denied the care that or the education their children are due under the law. The law was very clear in 2014. The money has not followed. We can play games with the process. It is about money. What happens is parents go to a tribunal, and 95% of the time they win. And all that's done is suck up time and money and resource for local authorities, because they are fighting every single time to say, actually, we don't want to spend the money, just like with the NHS and primary care. The money is the core. And the other thing is there are no therapists. There are not occupational therapists, there are not speech and language therapists, because the pay is abysmal. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, but you're going through all the things that are wrong, but in terms of what the government have said, why do you fear this approach that they seem to be taking?
Well, I'm all for putting kids in mainstream school. My daughter is 15 and she goes to mainstream school in the UN, and it's fantastic. My concern is it's pretending that the problem isn't there, and that somehow reforming the process is going to make the difference. It needs people, and it needs money. And the other thing is, what happens is all the councils and schools kick the can down the road, because each school has to pay the first £6,000. If they don't pay £6,000, the local council won't fund it. And what happens is kids, I know friends, my daughter's kids, they kick the can down the road 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and they're so behind, either psychologically or in terms of their educational skills or whatever it is, that the damage is already done.
Okay. All right, Chris, thank you. Anna Firth, you will have experienced lobbying from parents whose children have special educational needs. What do you make of this supposed new approach from the government, from what we know?
So I actually do agree that these educational healthcare plans are a nightmare. They're a nightmare for the parents, and they're a nightmare for the local authorities as well, because they have to find educational psychologists to sign off on them. I remember so often parents coming to me in despair about how they could fill these things in, and some parents who were good at it even offered to help, voluntarily to help other parents. So this is a problem where these healthcare plans are costing a lot of money. They're causing a huge amount of stress. They're not actually helping the children. So I don't have a problem with reforming the process in that way. But where I do have a problem is I'm not sure we're getting to the bottom of SEN. There are 1.7 million children in the UK now identified as having special educational needs. That is 19% of the children in this country. There's an argument for saying that isn't special if 19% of children have got some sort of educational needs. Well, it's a bit like
the statistic that 1 in 4 of the working age population is disabled.
Exactly. And each one of those children gets £6,000 a year of extra funding at school, and that costs us as a country £6 billion. Now, we have some wonderful special schools in Southend with some of the most vulnerable children with the most difficult physical and emotional and cognitive problems, and I don't want them to be shortchanged in any way at all, but I want the money to go to the front line, to getting people in the classrooms to help these children. But we've got to look at why are so many children.
Henry.
Well, I'll keep it brief. I worry we're slightly conflating the two things here. Firstly, on special educational need, it's right that more money's going into that, and that needs to be sort of the main priority. In terms of these ECHPs, I'm not completely sort of au fait with exactly sort of how they work, but they seem very onerous. The fact that they've gone up by sort of 12% in the space of a year, I think is, you can be concerned about that, but also still want there to be provision for children who have SEND, for people who have special educational needs, without necessarily putting them on an ECHP. I mean, I have dyspraxia, and I remember at school having a laptop and having sort of assistance for exams and whatnot and extra time. So From sort of that perspective, I think it's really important that sort of from whatever scale you are, and that is sort of quite close to the bottom in the sense that I didn't need an awful lot of assistance, but it certainly helped me get on. And I think without it, I'd have struggled a lot.
It'd be interesting. I don't know, Henry, but I imagine when you got that extra equipment, your parents and you didn't have to go through 18-month wrangle, maybe going to court backwards and forwards to get a diagnosis. And I think the point that Chris, the caller, made was sort of answering the question that he was posing in a way, because one of the things that I hope reform can achieve is to take that money and that time and that resource away from the courts and away from the battles that so many parents are having, and put that towards the children.
And it is.
That has to be the objective.
When we do phone-ins on this subject, you'll know this, Henry, the lines are always really busy, and you get the most emotional, heart-rending stories from parents who haven't got the facility to spend X thousand pounds on treatment.
Every single MP, probably every single week, more or less, will have someone come to their surgery in this situation. Parents are spending so much of their lives, so much of their time having to fight for their kids, and we just need to get the resource and the support to the kids when they need it.
Right, we've got so many questions coming in. It's 8:47.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Henry Riley, Jacqueline, McKenzie, Anna Firth and Dan Tomlinson here. Robbie in Chelmsford says the pensions triple lock is unaffordable, unsustainable and unjust. Discuss. Who shall I go to first? Henry, let's start with you, as you're the one that's least likely to get a state pension in the future.
Yeah, it's the furthest away. I think Robbie in Chelmsford's right, and I think Robbie in Chelmsford's got a very good point, and I know that the messages are going to be flowing through now, calling for my head because I've spoken ill of the triple lock, but actually I think it's one of the very few things that Kemi Badenoch has got right in opposition so far, talking about the fact that it's simply unaffordable. I mean, I'm in my 20s. You ask anyone in their 20s about cost of living, and the debate is still constantly dominated by pensions, by pensioners. We've had ad nauseum debate on a £300 payment for winter fuel, which I understand there are a lot of pensioners who need it. I understand there's pensioner poverty, but it still irks with people when you hear people using it for ski equipment and using it for sort of nice holidays. I mean, it's completely ridiculous, the winter fuel payment. Don't get me started on that. But on the triple lock, the simplest thing is it's completely unaffordable. The system needs complete reform, and I don't necessarily have the answer, but I think the triple lock in and of itself is not the solution.
Jacqueline.
Whether we have the triple lock or not, we're going to need something, because there is real pensioner poverty. But there's also this fact that most of us are going to have to work until we die to pay housing costs and the cost of living generally. I'm seeing adverts for people having mortgages up until they're 80. So how are people meant to live if they don't get inflationary increases, or or wage increases in the vernacular to equate that to a pension rise, or some other calculation to make sure that people can live a decent standard of life into their pension? It isn't. I mean, in my parents' generation, you perhaps would have gotten away with this, but it's not how we live now.
Okay. Anna?
I do think there is an argument for getting rid of the inflation bit of it, because logically, if you've got inflation running at 11%, but wages only going at 2%, then ultimately it can't be paid for. But I would absolutely keep the going up by the CPR and by going up by wages. But the broader question here is that I mean, when David Cameron brought this in, pensioner poverty was a real problem in this country, and we've done a lot to address that, and I'm really proud of that. But the broader problem here is that if you trash the UK economy, which is what this Labour government are doing, and you destroy growth is now completely stalling. Unemployment is going up. You lose control of public spending. You U-turn on everything. Then and you place this enormous tax burden on employers. Then obviously the tax take is going to go down, and you're not going to be able to afford all these benefits. But pensioners deserve to be protected.
Dan?
That was like when you're in PMQs and the leader of the opposition, but when she does her final question, make sure she gets all of her talking points in. So very impressive. It's very good. I'm going to have to respond and say that, to be clear, the growth at the moment in the UK, the first quarter of this year, was the fastest growth in the G7. That was what we said we'd want to get on a sustainable basis, and we got it. And yes,
we handed you an economy that was the fastest growing in the G7.
And it still is, so there we go.
And we handed you inflation down at 2%.
And it still is.
Well, it wasn't in April, to be fair.
And it still is. And also on tax rises, because the point was made, we're clear, yes, we did put taxes up in the budget last year. We used it to fund our public services and to make sure we put the public finances on a sustainable footing. It's entirely legitimate for the Conservatives to say that we shouldn't have done that if you're willing to say which public spending you would cut or which tax rises you would put up instead, but you're not willing to do that.
Anyway, back to the question.
I absolutely am.
Okay, well, that's good that you are. On the question of the triple lock is sustainable. The people who will benefit most from the triple lock are the people in their 20s and 30s who are less likely to have relatively generous defined benefit pensions and are more likely to have defined contribution pensions that will be lower by the time that they get to retirement age. The previous government did a good thing with auto-enrolment. I think there's more that we should be looking at on auto-enrolment to bring more people in, to make sure that the private pensions of the younger generation are the equivalent of the private pensions of the older generation. But the reason why we need to keep putting the state pension up is for tomorrow's pensioners who will need that money, so we don't have the increase in pensioner poverty that we saw in the 1980s.
Today's pensioners still need this support. We're seeing that.
Indeed.
And that's why there's been the outcry about the winter fuel allowance.
Some pensioners do.
Of course.
I mean, pensioners are the richest demographic of our population, so let's not pretend that all pensioners live in poverty, because they just don't.
Yes, I mean, and you're right that today's pensions have benefited enormously from house price inflation and so forth, but everything is predicated on the fact that we can't afford it, yet we're not taxing the very rich well. We're finding money to send to Ukraine, to give to Israel, and so on. We have to make some priorities.
Sorry, what money are we giving to Israel?
Well, I mean in terms of supporting arms and so forth. But I know we're not here to talk about Israel. We always predicate things on what we can afford, and when are we going to?
Surely that's the whole basis of running an economy.
But not just on the. But yes, but so long as we don't exclude the choices that we make in that, there are people in this country, myself included, who can pay more tax. I'm sure all of us in this room.
And there's a bank account in the Treasury that you can pay more tax to
on a voluntary basis. Well, I'd rather give to charity until there's a formal system.
Jacqueline is absolutely right. In May, the Chancellor has announced £300 billion of spending into infrastructure. If you've got £300 billion for infrastructure, you've got the money to pay pensioners winter fuel allowance.
Well, that's totally illogical.
Well, these are different things, because what we have to do is make sure...
If your government has spent £300 billion on infrastructure, we might not be in the mess that we're in.
We had COVID, Ian, and we had to get through COVID, and we spent an awful lot of money getting through COVID.
Right, next question from Ravi in Isleworth, who says Rishi Sunak has accepted a second job and donated his fee. Should all MPs donate money from any second jobs that they do to charity? Now, the former Prime Minister has announced that his earnings from his new role as a senior advisor to Goldman Sachs will be given to his and his wife Akshata Mercy's education charity, the Richmond Project, which aims to tackle numeracy problems. I suppose you could say, well, he could afford to do it. Maybe others couldn't. Anna, you didn't have a second job, did you?
I didn't have a second job at all. I gave up my job in order to become an MP.
Because you're a high-flying lawyer.
I was a barrister, but actually what I was doing just before going into Parliament was running an online academy, and I gave that up to go into Parliament. And at the time, and I certainly didn't have the time whilst in Parliament to do a second job. For me, it was a full-time job, and it occupied every hour, and I was very, very happy to do that. But there is no job security, I've discovered with being an MP, and I do think there is an argument that and I don't quite know how this would work in practice, but I do think there's an argument that MPs should be allowed to keep their hand in at something, for a few hours a week. And I'm very pleased that, Maria Caulfield, a great example, she always did one shift or two nursing shifts a week, often night shifts at the weekend, but now she's gone back into nursing. That worked, I think, two ways. She brought that brilliant experience into the House, and now she's gone back to her career. So I think this is actually a little bit more complicated than this question.
Quick answers from each of you, please. Dan?
I think it depends on the scale. I think it's a good thing that if Rishi Sunak's taking a second job, I don't think you should be taking big second jobs that take up a lot of your time. I think we've got to focus. Tell you what, my job is full time, and I'm a backbench MP, right?
And growth champion.
And the growth.
That's
champion.
The second job, really.
Yeah, well, there we go. Maybe though I'm not paid for that one. I think it's probably a good thing to be giving money to charity if and when MPs take second jobs. I think that MPs have to be really choice about the decisions that they make to do additional jobs. If they're able to bring expertise in, like people working in the health service, I think that's really good. And definitely people in doctors and nurses and those who work in the NHS or in health, they need to keep their foot in the door to keep their licence. I think that's a good thing.
I mean, I think, I'm sure Rishi Sunak is going to contribute wonderful things to Goldman Sachs. He's obviously hugely experienced and knowledgeable and highly qualified for it. I think it's symbolic and not that important that he's giving his salary away, because he is a hugely rich, very, very, very rich man. I think I do accept that MP salaries are not great. For how they have to live. I mean, it's a bit like myself as a partner at a law firm. I was saying to somebody the other day, you take your colleagues out, you're expected to pay. There is a cost of being in a particular role. And I would imagine MPs have a cost of being, although they get expenses. Well, no, absolutely, it's that sort of thing. Constantly, every day, I'm asked for a donation of some sort. So I kind of understand why it happens. But then you've got somebody like Nadia Whittome MP who gives away part of her salary, and I think that's hugely credible.
Well, I mean, even Rupert Lowe, I think, gives away his whole salary, very much on the other end of the political spectrum. But I think broadly it's a good thing. People like Rosanna Allen Khan doing sort of A&E shifts, a good thing. I think if people don't like it, some politicians clearly take the mickey, then you can boot them out of the next election. I mean, slightly, when I heard I think it was George Freeman last year, sort of, woe is me, when he couldn't afford his mortgage, when he was just getting a ministerial salary. I mean, give me a break.
Mm. Yeah, we all got our onions out of our pockets for that, didn't we, Anne?
Yeah.
Right, our fun question from Rose in Bristol. And Dan, you need to be careful how you answer this one, mate. With claims that Starmer is going to do a government reshuffle this summer, what would you love to be minister for? It doesn't have to be a real government job either. Henry?
Growth mission champion, obviously, like Dan.
There's no other job that anyone would ever need.
Is that the summit of your ambition?
I was going to say US ambassador, but that doesn't count. Probably foreign secretary.
Okay.
Home Secretary, so that we can really find a humane way to deal with the very small number of asylum seekers who come to the UK, given the overall numbers across the globe.
Anna?
Well, given I took over from David Amess, I always used to say I wanted to be the Minister for Southend, but I'd love to be media, culture and sport, because then I could continue supporting Southend United, go to all the best shows, and generally my team used to say that was the Ministry for Fun.
So you just want free tickets, that's what you're saying. Dan, what is your ambition? Which job would you like?
Well, I'll tell you one thing I would like to do. I would like to have a ministerial role that helped us spend all this transport infrastructure and this infrastructure money across the country. One of my personal obsessions is how on earth infrastructure costs so much in this country compared to in other advanced economies, and I'd like to put my hands to the wheel in trying to reduce those costs so we can get more good things built.
Well, if you become Secretary of State for Transport, I'll come and be your special advisor.
OK, all right. Well, let's consider that one.
Right, thank you all very much indeed. On Monday, we will have Labour MP Polly Billington on the panel, the political journalist Lara Brown from The Spectator, and the political TV producer Neil Breakwell. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to talk about Jeremy Corbyn and this new left-wing party that doesn't have a name, it doesn't exist, but apparently is going to exist. And there's an interesting survey out today that shows that 1 in 3 Labour supporters would consider voting for a new left-wing party led by Jeremy Corbyn. Now, we're going to look at the consequences of that, because that could be catastrophic for the official Labour Party if that turns out to be true. Because if the Labour vote, if the left-wing vote splinters and the right-wing vote splinters between the Tories and Reform, we're heading for coalition after the next election. I think probably that's the most likely outcome. Is that really what people want?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, families affected by the infected blood scandal have told LBC time is running out for the government to compensate them. The chair of the public inquiry says further harm is being caused by delays to pay out.